Welcome back to Chronicle. Mike Heavican, the Chief Justice of the Nebraska Supreme Court, has some definite ideas on how our legal system can be better, and he wants it to be the best it can be because the world is watching.
Idea that courts are the forgotten branch of government, and we want people to appreciate the hard work that our judges do, and the importance of a functioning judiciary that is impartial and fair in every way that it can be. The world at the moment is facing a lot of problems with the rise of dictators and countries, particularly China and Russia, who want to impose their totalitarian principles on the rest of the world. It is extremely important that Western democracies, and in particular the United States, understand the importance of our democratic institutions, particularly the courts. And it's my understanding that Vladimir Putin in particular has great scorn for the American judicial system because it is in fact fair and impartial, certainly as compared to the institutions in totalitarian nations. I've also been at seminars where it has been pointed out that the Russians have tried to interfere in judicial elections in states around the country, which is a sign about how powerful a independent judicial branch is to not just this country but to the world. And so that message has to get out. And that is part of why we have cameras in our courts. That is part of why we go to high schools around the state of Nebraska. That's part of why the Court of Appeals goes to our various colleges. Why we want to do everything we can to make sure that people understand how important courts are.
How long are you going to do this?
How long am I going to do this?
Not the interview.
A question that I suspect many people are asking in one way or another. I had kind of a difficult decision last summer as to whether or not I was going to put my name on the ballot for another 6-year term. I decided to do that, and I am grateful that the citizens of Nebraska voted to retain me, so I have the potential of six more years here. But of course, I'm 75 years old, so health is a big part of determining whether or not I will be here for 6 years. My health at the moment is very, very good. So that will be a big factor in how long I will be here.
If you can make one systemic change before you leave office, what would it be?
You know, I have tried to move the court system, what I would say, into the 21st century. I've not been very successful about that. I don't think that we would design a court system today using the model that we have. We've got 2 tiers of trial court judges. Early on, it became apparent to me that that is not a very efficient system at all. I would like all of our judges, I would like 1 tier of trial court judges where basically every judge can do everything so that you can allot resources a lot more efficiently in that way. I also think the clerks of the district court who keep the records for the district courts, those ought to be part of the Supreme Court's budget. They ought to be part of the state unified system. That's the biggest chunk of the court system that's not part of the court system. And I think that we also have to face the issue at some point in time as to whether or not we need to regionalize or have fewer courthouses. We've got 93 courthouses around the state of Nebraska, with county courts in each one of those courthouses and district courts in each one of those courthouses. We've got 2 levels of clerk's offices in each one of those courthouses, or almost. In 10 counties, we have worked with county government to take over the district court clerk's offices, and we've combined those clerk's offices, which is not only tax friendly, but it's friendly to everybody who walks into the courthouse and wants to go to a clerk's office, but there's a clerk's office on the 3rd floor and a clerk's office on the ground floor, and they're not sure which office they need to go to. That's an 1890s kind of court system.
You're tilting at windmills there, aren't you? I mean, are you going to be able to change
I
the system?
definitely am tilting at windmills, but at some point in time, that is going to have to happen. All of those things are going to have to happen because people are going to realize that the real problem with property taxes in Nebraska and other kinds of taxes is government is not efficient enough. And people eventually are going to demand those kinds of efficiencies, and they are going to have to realize that time changes and that the makeup of institutions has to change also.
Now, if you want to watch the show again, it's available on the very local app. All KETV News Watch 7 reports are there and free. Chief Justice Heavican scheduled to present his State of the Judiciary February 21st. It's a week from Tuesday. We'll be covering it for you. I'm Rob McCartney. See you next Sunday.